of the internet to the first episode that we're actually going to show you of the Liberty Cadre Podcast. I am your Liberty ambassador and Liberty Cadre contributor, Matthew Cobb, accompanied by our wonderful hashtag Slay Queen editor, Nzinga Johnson, also known as Nzinga J on the YouTube. How are you doing today, Nzinga, as if we haven't been talking for the last 30 minutes?
A little bit, a little tired, but I'm ready to chit-chat about this.
Yeah, I know that feeling. So, as usual in today's news cycle, there's been a lot of stuff going on over the past week. I think the top story on everybody's minds is the horrific shootings that occurred in Christchurch, New Zealand last week. And I have to confess, when I first heard about the story and hadn't really looked into the details, I assumed that the victims were Christian because I saw the phrase Christchurch and I didn't realize it was talking about a city. I figured it was actually talking about a church.
Mhm.
Needless to say, I was very, very, very incorrect about that. But just a horrific incident. The death toll is currently 50 people were shot in two separate shootings by a man whose name I will not mention here because he doesn't deserve to have his name mentioned.
Right.
Uh, but he was basically a white person of Australian descent, by my understanding. A kind of, I'm not even going to say alt right because that doesn't even quite go far enough, but a legitimate white supremacist and white nationalist. Uh, Zinga, what are your thoughts on this horrible tragedy?
I think the main thing that I was concerned about, the incident already happened. There's not much we can do about it. And even outside of the gun control talk that is going to come up, the thing that concerned me the most was that folks were blaming people in the United States
Hmm.
for like inspiring this guy. And the thing that I kept bringing up when I would talk about it over the internet with folks is that this guy has an issue in his head, like a legit lunatic, and he could have been set off by anything. And so I know folks were blaming Candace Owens, and then you had the media that were clearly blaming Trump for all of this and kind of like white nationalism and all of that. And when you read what he said in his manifesto, and I wasn't able to read all of it, but some of the things that I did catch, he was not a conservative, or he is. I'm acting like he's dead. He's not a conservative, and so kind of comparing him to conservative Americans was a far stretch. But obviously, the media took a hold of that and kind of ran with it. But I think Candace Owens is one of the people he mentioned, and he even was. I mean, he wrote like a lunatic, so he said things about Freddie Mercury and some other pop stars. I mean, the guy was clearly crazy, but I think what made me more, I guess, mad, like, obviously I was angry and upset about the people being killed, was that folks were blaming conservatism in America on the incident happening. And so that was kind of one of the things that I caught outside of the gun control and all of that jazz.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really frustrated me too. How people were talking about how Trump, in particular, had somehow encouraged this, which
Right.
to me is just utterly ridiculous. I mean, the attack. This happened in New Zealand. How are you going to blame an American president for something that did not even happen in this country?
Mhm.
And you were talking about his manifesto. The media completely bastardized their reporting on that because the references to Trump, per the excerpt that I read from the New American, his reference to Trump, he actually said that when it came to his policies and his leadership capabilities, that his response as to whether or not he supported Trump in that regard was, I believe it was, "Dear God, no."
Right. Right.
Not not to mention the irony of a person like this guy even invoking God's name for anything, but
Yeah.
still, that was the crazy part, and really the from what his comments were in his manifesto, really the only thing he seemed to like about Trump and this wasn't really even a Trump characteristic, more so just a case of how white nationalists apparently, to the extent that they view him as a common uh, call to action, I
Mm.
guess, for their movement, he appreciates that portion of it in the sense that, well, okay, if he motivates people to action, and not by anything that he's doing, but if they somehow come to the conclusion that, oh, okay, this guy is somebody that we can, I guess, be happy about, even though he clearly doesn't agree with our ideologies. But
Mhm.
anyway, to the extent that he could be a rallying cry of
Right.
sorts, is what the shooter seemed to like about him or support about him. But that was the thing I found interesting, is that he was saying how, oh well, I support him as like a sense of common, a symbol of common purpose for white people, but I don't actually think he's a good leader or that his policies are good. I'm like, what?
Right. But
Seems,
somehow he influenced Trump influenced this guy somehow to go in and kill all those people. And the other thing that got me too was kind of the Islamophobic talk that came out of that. Like somehow white people are prejudiced against Muslims, and American conservatives are Islamophobic, which led to this guy going in and Facebook living a murder spree. Uh, a bit of a stretch.
yeah, that's definitely a stretch. And I think the
Mhm.
thing that really aggravates me is having taken the unfortunate task of slogging through some of these white nationalist people's writings online. You find that the main way that they recruit people is by feeding into this narrative that the left is pushing, which is that anyone who has a right of center position on something is a white nationalist. If you're
Right.
concerned about border security, white nationalism. If you
Mhm.
like low taxes, white nationalism. If you think radical Islam is a problem, white nationalism.
Mhm.
And these guys feed on that, and they almost use that as a recruiting tactic, in the sense like, well, people already hate you and are going to call you a racist anyway. Why not join us?
Mhm.
So,
Well,
and
then you have someone who's clearly sick in his head, and
mhm,
all his mental faculties have broken down somewhere. I mean, this kind of thing was bound to happen.
yeah, that too. And I think, and it's really a shame that the left keeps wanting to use the tactic that they do, because I feel like they are helping the white nationalist movement. I feel like they are helping them grow by trying to slander everybody
Mhm.
as who disagrees with them as a white nationalist. I think they're and people are still responsible for their own, decisions and ideas and all that, but it's still just disgusting to me how the left is basically pushing all these people into the arms of crazy groups like white nationalists, and then they want to act like, oh, it's Trump that's encouraging this, it's conservatives that's encouraging this. Like, no, it's you that's encouraging this by claiming that people who have legitimate concerns about the border and about terrorism and all these other things are just racist.
Mhm. Well, then they scare the crap out of minorities as well. So if I'm watching CNN or MSNBC, I'm like, there's a growing number of men that look like Matthew Cobb,
Mhm.
and they want to kill me. And they literally want me to leave America. They don't want me to go to my mosque. They don't want me. They don't want blacks here. They don't want Mexicans here. They don't want anyone that's brown here. And so then you have this great divide that happens between the races and the religions in America, all based off of a lie that somehow we have this huge number of KKK and white nationalists that are completely racist.
Mhm. And it waters down the fact that the left likes to keep watering down these terms like racism and white nationalism and white supremacism by applying them to everybody. It's like, it's really harmful when it comes to trying to stop the people who actually are parts of these movements, because and it's kind of like a similar mistake that we've made on the right to a degree with socialism. When you start calling everybody and everything racist or white nationalist, people start to think, well, are those things really so bad? Because if they're just thrown around as pejoratives for everything, like, well, if white nationalism is just having a, being opposed to illegal immigration, which it's not, it's a far more sinister ideology than that. But if
Mhm.
people start to associate it with reasonable things like border security, then people are gonna eventually start to adopt the attitude, well,
Right.
is this so bad? And it's because the left keeps watering down these terms by associating them with things that are not evil, that are reasonable positions, that this
Mhm.
is happening.
Mhm.
And they have seem to have no interest in taking any responsibility for that whatsoever. And to be clear, I'm not trying to claim that the American left was responsible for the shooting by any stretch of the
Right.
imagination. My
Right.
only point is that they are they are not helping the cause of defeating white nationalism by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, like I keep saying, and like I said, I had a slight debate with a friend of mine, and showing all the tweets that this person said and that person said about uh, Muslims and Islam in France, for instance, and how I mean, in probably the next generation, Europe is going to look very brown, pretty much, and people are concerned about it. But you have that kind of information, and then there's something wrong with you mentally,
Hmm.
like you and your and it's a guy, men tend to
Hmm.
be a little more violent. I mean, something like that can happen, but um he could have been inspired by someone on the left. He could have been inspired by anything. It just so happens that he maybe saw a couple of tweets from Candace Owens and thought, oh well, this is great, which doesn't really make sense because she's black, and how would he get super extra white nationalist if I'm a black woman,
Yeah, that does not sound consistent at all. And what he claims in his manifesto, and I guess we do have to remember that we have to take the stuff that he puts in his manifesto with a grain of salt to a degree, because this is stuff that he wanted people to believe. This is the narrative that he wanted to push. Um, but what he claims in the narrative is that it was some sort of, I guess, attack or something that happened in New Zealand, and he has just like this emotional response to it. And that was another thing I noticed about the manifesto was like you can always tell that someone is trying to push some sort of dangerous ideology when they are focusing all on the emotions of it rather than any logic or reason or factual information.
Hmm.
Because his manifesto, at least for the portions of it that I uh, am familiar with, are very heavy on that. And
Right.
and another thing that was interesting about his manifesto that is the fact that he basically, right, so part of his goal here was to make civil war erupt in the United States between the left
Right.
and the right. And
Mm-hmm.
here the left has gone and played right into his hands by doing exactly what he was hoping they would do in pushing for more gun control, in slandering uh, people on the right as being the same mindset as him. And what's even more disgusting when it comes to this media tactic of slandering conservatives as white nationalists or white supremacists or even alt right is if you actually read some of the ramblings of these crazy white nationalists and alt right people, you'll find they actually don't like more traditional libertarian leaning conservatives very much.
Right.
Like they don't have much use for us because we believe in things like freedom and individualism, like this whole idea of uh,
Mhm.
uniting around a sense of common racial pride. That's not something that's part of conservatism or libertarianism, and
Mhm.
white nationalists can't stand that.
No.
They hate that we actually believe in freedom and that all individuals have value. And
Mhm.
yet, all conservatives are white nationalists, according to some people in the media.
Well, even the black ones,
Mhm.
because I've seen. I was just watching videos with Alan West today,
Mhm.
and it was like, "Do you consider yourself black?" Like, he thinks he's white inside, so that's why he's conservative, and that's why he thinks the way he does and says the things he says. I mean, we've seen videos of mobs of people calling Candace Owens a white supremacist, and I'm like,
Mhm.
so you don't just become white all of a sudden because you are conservative or you believe in the creed of America. And um, it also shows that um, liberals, for the most part, for the most part, it shows that they really don't look into what these things actually mean and what these people actually believe. Because, like,
Mhm.
you look at someone like Richard Spencer, the things that he says, like, obviously, I don't agree with it.
Mhm.
Um, but they think that he's on the right, like he's kind of like how he thinks like we think, and he absolutely does not. And the newest Dinesh D'Souza movie kind of proves that, where he was saying all these things, and Dinesh D'Souza is asking him questions and probing him, and as the questions continue, he's answering. You finally realize this guy's a socialist, like a real socialist, you know. And then he says, "Well, he." And then Dinesh says, "Okay, let me respond to what you said." He tells him what America is and what we believe, and then he says, "This is socialism." And then Richard's like, "Well, I guess I'm a socialist." And so it's clear that the left really doesn't look into what these things actually mean, but they think it's negative and maybe it'll hurt someone's feelings, so they just kind of throw it out there. But I think you're right in that they're trying to create a narrative and then lump everybody into one, all of the bad people into one. And I think it's a way to make them look virtuous. Like, even gun control in and of itself is not virtuous if you want to take and confiscate everyone's guns, but they make it seem that way. But it's all about control. And so all of these things, I think, when a tragedy happens and some lunatic goes shooting someone, or there's a debate and we call people names and white supremacists and all of that, I think the bottom line is to whatever we can do to gain control over the masses. Um, and unfortunately, they use tragedies like, what happened in New Zealand to do it.
Yeah, that does seem to be pretty much the case, though. You mentioned earlier how that just being conservative doesn't make you any less black. I think from the left's mindset, it almost fits in with their kind of viewpoint on gender, because on their view, like everything's fluid. It's not about what your biology is; it's about how you feel, and all that good stuff. So I wonder if they're just starting to selectively apply that to race, like, oh well, if you're conservative, you're somehow automatically like identifying as white or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Their logic is all over the place, and they keep moving the goalposts. So who knows?
Yeah, it's really crazy, and it's funny you bring up Richard Spencer, because I mean you're right. Like the man is not a conservative. Like he's a socialist, but he's a national socialist, if you will. Like if you want to legitimately compare someone to Hitler in terms of ideology,
Hmm.
Spencer and they're cut from a similar cloth.
Hmm.
So and it's really crazy
Hmm.
that the left will try to throw people like Alan West or Trump and others in with those sorts of people. To me, it's a clear indicator that they have never actually looked at what these people like Richard Spencer and white nationalists actually believe in. To an extent, I can't blame them, because it's not really fun stuff to read. I mean, it's fun in the sense that it's so crazy and it's so insane that it's it's entertaining in a very dark way. Like
Hmm.
it's entertaining in the way, like, I cannot believe there are people who actually believe that there is a thing called white genocide. Like,
Right. Right.
but it's but and which is sad, because in truth, like, these people, fortunately, I don't think there's not very many of them, and they don't have a lot of power. But if they ever got it, they'd be some very dangerous people.
We'd be a very different looking country. But another thing um, that people don't understand when you go back to like the definitions of things, like really looking into what ideologies really mean.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. The thing that the guy in New Zealand did is kind of a left leaning thing. Like, you think about uh, or the way he thought, because clearly Hitler was a lunatic, right? But the bottom line came down to, oh, the way we fix this situation is to kill them all.
Hmm.
And but that's all about that control, like, taking away freedoms and liberties and stuff like that. You demonize one group, they are to blame for something, and then we have to keep them under control and then ultimately wipe them out. Like a
Mhm.
lot of that's been a lot of left-leaning ideas. Now, I'm not saying American liberals are like that and they want to do that, but there is this thing of controlling outcomes that tends to be kind of on the left. Like, no matter how you want to put it, you can even affirmative action here may be like controlling outcome, but for him it was okay. We need to go and we need to. This is how we fix this situation is we just get rid of them,
Mhm.
and people on the right, not alt right, the real right, we don't
Mhm.
think that way. We're like, okay, we need to somehow figure out how to change these people's minds. How can we let them understand more and give them more knowledge and give them powers and so they can make their lives better and take control of their own lives. Like we're all about backing up and taking our hands off of the situation as much as possible, believing that that person can find the right way for their life. And the left doesn't do that. So I hate to say it, but the way the guy thinks, I'm not saying he was a liberal or a leftist, but the way he thought about things is kind of in the left leaning kind of, I don't know, sphere. You know what I mean? If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and I mean, yeah, and I see your point because I think, and if you look at kind of the white nationalist rhetoric, you'll find that in many ways it actually is quite collectivist. It is
Right.
idea about the group above the individual.
Hmm.
So I can definitely see what you're saying there, and I would actually say that there's a from kind of a faith perspective. I think this is an example of how dangerous a sin pride is because this is because I think most people can look at their societies and see problems that they wish didn't exist and would like to see solved. But there's something very dangerous when you start coming to the idea that only you can solve this problem and that someone has to do something and that someone has to be you and that no matter what the cost is, you have to solve this problem
Hmm.
that you see.
Hmm.
When I mean, in reality, especially we're both Christians, so from our perspective, it's the case of there's certain things that you want to help people as much as you can, but when it comes down, if solving you is a problem requires you to do something, then
Hmm.
that's the case of you let try to take things into your own hands is a dangerous. It's not only is it a lack of trust in God, but it's a dangerous sense of pride.
Hmm.
It's of all the things the devil was guilty of, that was his biggest sin, and it's in many
Hmm.
ways I think the most dangerous one, evident in the fact that because if you read this guy's manifesto, he became so self-righteous to the ideas like this is the right thing to
Right.
do, and
Right.
I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me different,
Hmm.
and consequences be damned.
Hmm.
I think there's pride just all throughout that, all throughout those assumptions. It's just it's
Hmm.
I don't think there's been any more incident that I can recall recently that
Hmm.
illustrates how dangerous that sense of pride is and the things that it can drive you to do when combined with dangerous ideas.
Right. I mean, you think about it. The kind of American left has done it over and over and over again, where we define what a human is. We did it in slavery. We're doing it now with abortion.
Mhm.
We define what a woman is, what a man is, and we create different names of different genders and sexualities and stuff like that. And I was having a discussion about abortion, and it was just like, who are we to think that we can just say, you know what, this is inconvenient. I'll take this person's life. Like that's pretty darn prideful and haughty, and it's putting us at a place that really only God has. That's why we have the Constitution, this kind of American creed where I don't rule over your life, you don't rule over my life. The only person that can rule you, if you allow him, is God, and he has your best interest at heart. So that's not
Mhm.
really a scary thing, but it is something on the left. I mean, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying like, "Well, you do it then. You do it. You know what? You're not. I'm the boss." So somehow there is this again this self-righteous idea that this is all up to me and you need to follow me or we're all going to die in 12 years. It's Like, it's hilarious when we look at it, but at the root of it is that sense of pride, and it's the same sense of pride and self-righteousness that the shooter in New Zealand had.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I think most of us probably struggle with pride to some
Yeah.
degree, but it's
Mhm.
definitely. I mean, it's a perfect example of what can happen when you allow it to rule your life. And you made a
Right.
good point about how we have, in so many ways, in the United States and really across the Western world, just basically convinced ourselves that we have no higher authority, that our
Uh-huh.
highest authority is us and our own wants and desires. And it's not a bad thing to pursue happiness in and of itself, but
Mhm.
when you put that is your God, and this is what I think a lot of people don't realize who are not believers, that everyone has their God, whether they acknowledge it as such or not. you,
Right.
you know, and most people's God is their own happiness. That's the thing that they
Mhm.
pursue in life. That's their
Mhm.
highest priority. That's the thing that they are willing to subject any other sense of decency or morality to.
Right.
And which frankly is exactly what the devil wants, because in Genesis, his very first uh, thing he said to tempt Adam and Eve was, God doesn't have you can be like God, you can be your own boss. I mean, more or less. And
Mhm.
it's really, it's I would say it's interesting, but it's a little more sinister than just
It's
interesting.
disturbing. Mhm. It's
Yeah, but it
disturbing.
very much so. Well, speaking of disturbing things, this terrible attack in New Zealand is not the only religious related violence that has occurred in the world recently. Per, and I'm going to see if I can bring up the article here. Per the Independent Sentinel, and there have been a couple of other Christian sources that reported on this. We shared this story on the Liberty Cadre Facebook page. It's actually,
Mhm.
best on I can tell, probably had more engagements than any other post we've ever made.
Yeah,
Uh,
it has.
I think thousands of people had shared it.
Mhm.
But basically, um, in the past 3 weeks, this group of, the story calls them radical Muslims, but their official name is the Fulani. They've killed 120 Christians and burned
Mhm.
140 of their homes in 3 weeks in Nigeria. And I mean, that's basically the tipping, like the tip of the iceberg with that story. And hardly, if you really dig around on certain Christian websites, you can find more details. But
Right.
it's amazing that no one has talked about this story, and it's hard. I've heard maybe some arguments about how it's getting dismissed because it's just, oh, it's a land dispute. There's really, there's no explicit persecution going on here. It's just a land thing, and I'm not so sure I buy that. But even if that is the case, you would still,
Right.
this many people getting killed, even if it's just over a land dispute. I would still think that's pretty major news. But for some
Mhm.
reason, the news media is just almost completely ignoring it, again, just beyond a handful of Christian websites.
Mhm. I'll be honest. I hate to be so kind of cynical or negative because I don't want to demonize people and make people out to be like us versus them. They're the enemy. In some ways, it's true, but in some ways, it's not. But in this case, there is this pro like Islam thing going on in America, and we're celebrating it. And we got women wearing hijabs with American flags. We've got at least two ladies who were new congressmen. They're freshman congressmen, and we're all celebrating them. They're in the news all the time, even though they say some of the stupidest things. We still celebrate them, and they're still kind of protected by the left. And like the hijab is like a symbol of freedom or liberty or whatever. And I think that if like for folks in the mainstream media to share a story like this and to write about it or talk about it on their shows, it would mess up that narrative that Islam is great and we should all try it and we should celebrate it and we should lift those up who are Muslim. That's really what I believe, because it's already happened in Europe. Like I used to follow Lauren Southern a lot last year and the year before, and she did a lot of documentaries and videos on Islam over in Europe. And let me tell you, it is not pretty. And people don't even know, Americans don't even know what's going on over there. And so, and I think it's because the media doesn't want them to know. And I've seen Fox, I've seen Tucker Carlson, they'll have folks like Katie Hopkins, Lauren Southern, Nigel Farage, they'll have these people on their shows talking about what's going on in England at least. And but I haven't seen it on any other news network. I don't think they're reporting on it, or at least they're not reporting on it as much as they probably should, because I think this is a warning. Now, this isn't about race or racism or anything like that. I'm not hating anyone. I just know if you were to line up Sharia law and the Quran and Islam with America, they just do not go together. They cannot coexist in one country, and I think Europe is a good example of that. But the left wants this narrative that we can coexist, and then they don't want Christianity for some reason. Christians are to shut up. They need to keep to themselves, and they'll do everything they can to dock the Christian, to find the skeletons in the closet, and they'll show the sad story, which is a really sad story of these 50 people being murdered in a mosque, but they don't talk about the 200. And I mean, there's more. There's more. This is just one story.
Mhm.
I have stories coming across my news feed all the time in third world countries where Christians are being martyred. But anyway, I really think that the reason why we're not seeing the story as much as we probably should is because it doesn't fit what the narrative that they're trying to create in America concerning Islam.
Yeah, and I think I would have to agree with you to a large extent there. And I think the whole trying to promote Islam, and this is the thing about the left that I think is particularly noteworthy, is the fact that I don't even think it's because they particularly care for Islam per se. I
Mm.
think it's they know that the West is, particularly the United States, the foundation of our religious viewpoints and religious philosophy is Christianity and Judaism,
Right.
and Islam is something that is opposed to that has probably got the largest following. So I think for them it's a matter of, well, this is against something that is traditionally part of Western values and culture. So in their minds, anything that fits that definition is good. It's why they try to undermine like traditional gender norms, the notion of men and women being biologically different. The, I mean, the mere fact of men and women actually being biological designations and not a feeling.
Mm.
If you go on, that's this whole mindset of kind of cultural Marxism and intersectionality is just trying to undermine any sort of social norms that have taken hold in the West. Like, and you can go far even to things like they talk about how beauty standards are tyrannical. They talk about
Right.
they're pushing like fat acceptance, like just any little thing that is kind of considered to be normal in
Mhm.
Western society is a bad thing to them.
Mhm.
So I think they've latched onto Islam mainly because of that more than any other reason. And it's a shame because I do think that when it comes to Muslims who do not believe in Sharia law, and I think there's actually been studies done that have shown like American Muslims are actually, I think, significantly less radical than ones who kind of are in actually majority Islamic countries. So
Mhm.
I mean I think there's a way that we can coexist at least to a degree,
Mhm.
but I don't think that I definitely don't think that Sharia law or the more extreme parts of Islamic ideology are compatible with the West or the Constitution, or really even if we're talking about jihad, I don't think that's in any way consistent with any reasonable sense of human decency. And beyond that, I don't like to speak on the details of what the Quran actually says because I haven't read it. I don't know. I've heard what people have said it says, but I also know that people love to take stuff in the Bible out of context and use that to claim that Christianity supports all sorts of things. So I don't like to make judgments on what the true Islam actually says, but I can definitely say that the radical version of it that supports jihad and Sharia law is not really something that we can just tolerate as a matter of cultural difference.
Mhm, mhm. Um, it's interesting because when you start looking into Islam and what they all believe, it's like kind of like the Old Testament and New Testament in that at some point in Muhammad's life he changed and he kind of became a warlord at the latter end of his life, and so there's a certain kind of, I guess, school of thought, or kind of like how we have apologetics, um,
Mhm.
something like that. I can't remember the exact word for it, but it's a way to study the Quran, and it's like you take the things that he said in the latter part of his life more seriously than the earlier part of his life.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the latter part was when he became like a warlord and beheaded, like, was beheading people and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
little.
it's radical, and I think like studies have shown different things of what Muslims believe and all that jazz. It's the I think the reason why it's concerning, um, it's concerning that they're kind of being sympathetic in America towards Islam is because of the radical nature of a lot of a lot of it. It's
Mhm.
like the way the women are treated and so on and so forth. It's concerning. It's also, I wouldn't be as concerned if I didn't look at Europe, like
Mm.
and seeing what has happened there and how like like you said, I think that there is an aspect of coexisting. Um, but the problem is that the authorities there, I mean, from the police up, they just said, okay, we'll let you go with this one. We'll let it slide here. We'll let it slide here. And now to the point where people are trying to get out of the countries they grew up in and they were born in. And cops won't do things. Even, I mean, they have brothels where they have like children hooked on heroin. But it's okay because Allah will be okay with it. And that's what they say. I've seen. I mean, I have watched this. I watched this stuff like during 2016, like hours out of my day. And so I get concerned about Islam, and then I get concerned that our media are they seem to be anti-Jesus and pro Muhammad. And like I don't think they should be pro or against either one. I think that it should just be straight up, this is what happened, this is the news, but they don't seem to be doing that. And so you know, when we talk about the Christians in Nigeria and how more of them were murdered, and it's just it's concerning for me, one being American and being a Christian, and then being a woman. So
Mhm.
anyway, I don't because I'm trying not to sound Islamophobic. I think I have a healthy concern and a healthy fear of Islam, but I don't hate anybody. I don't want to see anyone dead or deported or anything like that. I get concerned with the ideology, and I'm very concerned that it seems that the leaders of my country are more against me because I'm a conservative and because I'm a Christian than if I were maybe a liberal, a Muslim.
Yeah, and I think the problem really in kind of the European nations is I think there's a difference in tolerating people of different cultures and different beliefs and taking political correctness so far that you will use someone's uh, status as a minority as basically to give them a pass. and I think it's kind of a broader trend of lawlessness in Europe in general. I actually have a friend at my job who is from Greece who has kind of talked to me in a lot of ways about how uh, he said, how we in the United States we almost take um, law and order for granted a little bit,
Mhm.
because from what he was telling me, in things like Greece, you will have people occasionally like just have riots on the streets, like not peaceful protests, but like legit riots, like vandalizing people's businesses and all that sort of thing, and the cops don't do anything about it. They just sit back and they let it happen, and
Mhm.
and that's just how it is over there. And I feel like maybe the same thing is happening in a lot of other countries with uh, in the case of these attacks that Muslims are attempting, and it's a shame because I know there's a lot of people out there who are Muslim who are they just want to be left alone and live in peace, and yet you have these people in uh, European countries and elsewhere that are being allowed to get away with these things by
Right.
police who don't have the courage to do anything about it,
Yeah.
and it's really a shame because and I think that the reason I'm being so careful here about
Mhm.
differentiating between radical Islam and American Muslims is because, especially with this thing that happened in New Zealand, what I've seen with the media trying to lump in conservatives like us with these white nationalists, and my fervent belief that that helps to create more white nationalists, is the last thing I want to do is to kind of do the same thing to Muslims and give them the impression of like, well, they think we're all radicals anyway. Let's just be radicals. So that's the reason why I try to be so careful there. But you're definitely right.
Right.
There's very much a legitimate concern, particularly in these European nations where they've just let all these refugees come in. And again, I think this is the key difference here is there's one thing between bringing people in and having giving them time to assimilate and having them retain certain aspects of their own culture but ultimately adapt to your values. There's a difference between that and just bringing people over in mass as they are, and then, oh my god, I can't believe how fast the culture of our country is changing. Well, yeah, you let a bunch of people in at one time who, at least it's clear at the moment, didn't share your values. You shouldn't be surprised when all of a sudden your country looks very different, like not just in like in a physical sense, because that's not really important, but the an ideological sense, in the sense of different values and kind of a clash of civilizations. I think that's why the people are so concerned about things like border security and immigration, because they're legitimate concerns. Like those things, negligence when it comes to immigration and just letting everybody in has consequences. And I think
Mhm.
people, particularly on the left, and it's weird how, because they talk about privilege all the time and they don't seem to recognize it in themselves at all. They are so privileged, they're so used to the idea of people in America, generally speaking, being tolerant of each other, that they don't realize that that's tolerance is not a built-in part of everybody's culture. Like in many majority Muslim countries, that's that's not part of their culture. Like uh, freedom, tolerance, equality, those things are not part of
Yeah.
culture that a lot of these people are coming from. And I think that's something excuse me, I think that's something that the left simply does not understand. They think that they can just bring over any number of people and that they're not going to bring their values with them. And they're horribly mistaken in that regard.
Well, at the same time, talk about values. The the refugees, which everyone thinks that they're women and children and maybe a few dads, they're all like 30-year-old men. So then
Hmm.
you got an influx of millions of men in a very small area like Europe, and then you think
Which is
that
weird
there's
because
not
you
going
would
to be
think that they would
consequences.
oppose that the left would oppose this mass migration just on that basis. Hey, they're bringing in all these men. They're bringing in reinforcements for the patriarchy. You know.
Well, they don't. Well, right, but they don't believe that they're men. Like, again, Lauren Southern went to a refugee camp, supposed to be all these Syrians, and there weren't any Syrians. They were all like, "Yes, I'm from Pakistan," or they were like from somewhere. They were from another like surrounding country, in the Middle East. And then she's like, "Where are the women and children?" There were like two kids and one chick, and they were the rest of them were men. But they get in by saying, "Oh, I'm 17," but they have a ton of melanin, so they look 17, but they're really like in their 30s.
So
So
enough
it's
to look like
it's a
they're
shame.
to look like they fit when they really not. As wouldn't you say that Kamala Harris would kind of classify as that a little bit? I know
Say it
you
again.
like to talk about that.
Yeah, let's not go there.
But yeah, so that is a marvelous problem. The influx of people with no vetting to Europe. And
Mhm.
speaking of things that are marvelous, or maybe not so much, another thing that this is a much lighter topic. Uh, the Captain Marvel movie has recently been released, and reactions to it have been, shall we say, varied, to say the least. Critics
Mhm.
seem critics seem to for the most part like it. Audiences, on the other hand, not so much.
Right.
So, what do you have to say about Captain Marvel and its wonderful lead actress Brie Larson, Zinga?
Okay, so I purposely have not seen this movie. Um, well, for one thing, I've just got too much going on in life. But I didn't carve out any time to see this movie specifically because of some of the things that she was saying before it was released. I think that Brie Larson is kind of on the spectrum of idiot. I think that I think that she is virtue signaling as much as possible, and I think that I, you know what? I was gonna say I think she did it for the ratings for her movie, but I really think that she believes what she says. So apparently, she was at some kind of award show, and I watched this clip. I'm trying to remember everything that she said, but pretty much the gist of it was that there are certain movies for certain kinds of people. There's movies for black women, and there's movies for white guys, and white men shouldn't be discussing movies for black women or something like that, and how they're and it's when white people talk that way, just the audience, when you talk that way about people who are browner than you, it's really condescending. It's like they have their own subculture, and I am white and privileged and beautiful and rich, and I have to protect them. Like, we don't need that. We don't need that at all. Not to mention some of the things that she said about white men. It's really condescending, and it seems as if she was just virtue signaling and saying all the right things as much as she possibly could at every chance that she had. And the things that she said were absolutely dumb. I mean, who do you think are fans of Marvel comics? A lot of them are white men. That was dumb for her to say that. And a lot of them probably follow Jordan Peterson and Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro, and but they still like comics. And guess what? If I were them, I wouldn't have gone to see it. And if they did, they probably bashed it the entire time because apparently her acting sucked anyway.
Yeah, and here's the interesting part for me, because I did go see it,
Mhm.
and on one hand, I feel like I'm gonna say hype, but not in a positive context. She hyped it up to be like this super feminist movie, and for the most part, it really wasn't. Like there were certain parts where you can tell that they were trying to push the message. Hey, did you know women can do things? Did you know that women can play baseball and serve in the military and do all these things that we traditionally consider masculine? Did you know that women could do these things? And you're kind of sitting there like, yes, movie,
Yeah.
I was already aware of that, but are you really? Let's show you another montage of her playing softball as a kid and riding a motorbike, and she failed at all these things, by the way,
Mhm.
in the movie. That like, and but I guess I should point out. spoilers for anyone who's actually going to see the movie. I'm about to spoil the crap out of it. But so like there's this one montage, like it shows at various points throughout the movie, and it's very lazy, I think, in telling actually Captain Marvel telling her life story, because it just does it a lot in very kind of spurious flashbacks. Like it shows her trying to play like t-ball and basically screwing up and falling on her face, and I guess some of the male kids like laughing at her, and it's all kind of brought like there's a part where she's like riding, it was like it's either like a go-kart or a motorbike or some fast vehicle, and you have like I think it's either an adult parent or some male telling her, "Hey, slow down," and of course, she flips it over, uh, and like it shows her in like Air Force basic training. She's like climbing a rope, and like the male drill instructors being like, "You can't climb that rope," da 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 da, and she fails. She actually falls down, I think, if I remember correctly, off the rope. But I get the point that they try to get across, like, oh, but she gets back up. She gets back up. She keeps trying. I'm like, well, that's nice and all, but if you're trying to make a real girl power sort of a movie, you know, maybe not make the message like, she keeps trying, but I mean, she fails at doing all these things. Like, and there's other areas where you can tell, and again, like it's not it sounds like a lot when I'm talking about it now, but it's not that much in the context of the whole movie. But there's little things here and here and there where you can tell like, okay, a feminist wrote this part, because like there's one part of the movie where so she's been sent back to the 90s or whatever. And she's like at this like stoplight, I guess, near the store, and there's like this biker who comes up with and tries to flirt with her a little bit, and he says one of the things that he says is like, "Kay, can I see a smile?" And of course, Captain Marvel, being played by Brie Larson, and like embodied every feminist in that moment and just scowled at the guy. And then so eventually, like something happens to where like the guy gets off his motorcycle for a little bit and goes inside, and then this she beast steals the man's motorcycle.
Because that's the right response. That's the normal response. If a guy drives up and he flirts with you or he tells you to smile and then he gets out of the car, you jump in the car and you steal it.
Yeah, he steal the guy's motorcycle. So I'm like,
right.
Yeah,
obviously,
Marvel, feminist hero and bike thief, everyone. But
you know what's funny? All of the things that you said she's done, the only thing that she did correctly was steal the bike.
Exactly. And it's really a shame, because I really thought there was a good story to tell there of a woman who's an Air Force pilot. I mean, especially considering like the time period in the movie. I mean, it's the sort of thing that's more common now, but definitely not as common. I really think they could have actually told a good story there, a good inspirational story, but they were so lazy about it. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is that it was spectacularly good, and it was, as I like to say, aggressively okay. Like if I had to rate it, I'd probably give it about a 6 out of 10, and I think,
mm-hmm.
and I have to agree kind of with the kind of a commonly expressed opinion of Brie Larson's acting. I probably didn't dislike it as much as a lot of people did, but I have to say she was a little wooden. She definitely Samuel L. Jackson, and who's in the movie a lot is Nick Fury. He carries this movie. Him and one of the like Skrull dudes who for some reason has an Australian accent. I think it's Australian. I remember he has an accent for some reason that he really shouldn't have. But him and Samuel L. Jackson, in my mind, really carry that movie. I think if if it were just Brie Larson by herself, the way she acted in that movie and was written, I think it'd be a very, very boring movie. And then it gets like there's just so much about it that this doesn't make sense. And
Right.
I'm rambling a little bit here, but we get to like the end where and this is another part where I think feminist stupidity kind of interfered with telling a good story, because the idea is like, she had this weird accident early in the movie where that gave her powers, but she's never really been able to fully tap into them. Basically, as the story goes, because her like Cree overlords or whatever basically have held her back, and then like, but here's the thing, like she's never trained how to use those powers. Like they've kind of come out on, you see them come out like 2 or 3 times in the movie, but she's never had any training. Like she's never practiced using these powers, right? But
Right.
somehow she takes off like this control device near the end of the movie. It's like, what would happen if I wasn't being held back anymore? Which is clear that that's supposed to be some kind of like metaphor for women being held back in society or something. But she takes off the control device, and all of a sudden she can fly, she can blow up ships, she can do all these things. Which I'm like, so you just magically know how to use your powers all of a sudden. Never mind, you've only in this movie basically used them more or less by accident a couple of times. But now all of a sudden, oh, the control device is off, and you magically know how to use all of them.
Hmm.
Like this,
Hey, she's a woman. She's powerful.
you know what? I guess that's it. If we just took off the mind control devices that the patriarchy is imposing upon all of you women, if we just took those off, you would magically develop superpowers and be able to, blast us into the Stone Age and instantly enact your empire where men are only kept around for our jokes and semen. But the that uh that that's a South Park reference for anyone who is unfamiliar with that. But
Oh, that's a good one. But what's funny? We were talking earlier. It was a much more serious topic, but we were talking about that pride. And I mean, she was so confident going into this movie. And I don't know if it's just because it's a Marvel movie and they do so darn well that she just was like, man, I'll use this opportunity to just kind of talk about my feminist ideas and my racial ideas. But it's like she went in so prideful, thinking that I guess she thought that her talking about these issues that are so important in America, like it would get people by the droves buying tickets to see her film. But apparently it just wasn't. It was like the lowest on the totem pole of all the Marvel movies. Is what
I
I
mean,
is what I hear.
I think I'd have to agree with that. And I mean, now it's same. Now, to be fair, that's like saying that something is the worst Marvel movie is like saying is the worst kind of pizza. Pizza is still pizza. Pizza is still good, but
Right.
I would definitely agree that it's definitely my least favorite Marvel movie that I've seen. I think it's definitely, even if you're just looking at it from like a like plot and things making sense. I think it's the worst Marvel movie. And there's one thing in it and some people may like this, I did not, but it explains how Samuel L. Jackson, or excuse me, Nick Fury, who Samuel L. Jackson plays, lost his eye because he has an eye patch in all the Avengers movies. Well, apparently, and I simultaneously think this is hilarious and think it's just a terrible idea. Apparently,
Hmm.
there is like this cat looking alien monster in the movie, and it legit looks like a cat. Like for most of the movie, everybody in it thinks it's a cat, and then it's revealed like, oh, it's this alien monster that just happens to look like a cat. And basically, Nick Fury is, it's kind of played up for comedy how affectionate he is with the cat and everything throughout the whole movie. And then the cat slash alien monster gets mad at him and scratches him in the eye, and it shows him with cuts in his eye, and they kind of talk about it. And then like in I think 2 scenes after that, he's shown with his eye patch on. I'm like, so that's how Nick Fury lost his eye. a freaking. I know it's supposed to be an alien monster, but a cat scratched his eye out. That's how Nick Fury lost his eyeball.
Right. Do you know like the comic, like the stories behind these things? Like I know my brother is really into it. And so before we'll go see a Marvel movie or even after, he'll explain some stuff like, well, in the comic this happened, that happened. So I've never even wondered why Nick Fury only had one eye. But I'm wondering if that matches up with like the historical documents.
Yeah,
Comic
I
books.
have historical documents. I, I I have admittedly my experience with the comic books lore of Marvel is limited, but if I had to guess, I would say that's probably almost certainly not happening in the comic. But
Gotcha.
none nonetheless, so I will definitely say because I've seen like the promos for it, they're talking like, oh, this is a game changer. I'm like, this movie is not a game changer. Like it's to me, it's kind of like Batman versus Superman. It's aggressively okay. Like it's
I hate it.
watchable. It's entertaining for the most
Mhm.
part, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense and some kind of frankly bizarre plot choices at certain points. And I think as for why Marvel let Brie Larson kind of shoot off at the mouth about how this is like this feminist masterpiece or whatever, a friend of mine who I went to go see it with suggested to me that like I think Marvel's just not satisfied with making good movies anymore. They feel like they have to put some sort of message into it. And if I had to guess, I'd say maybe that they maybe got the wrong idea from Black Panther's success,
Right.
and which is sad because like, and I know you may disagree with me on this one, but I actually thought Black Panther was a really good movie. I don't. I think that its cultural impact was vastly overstated, but as far as just being entertaining and being like having compelling characters, it was a good. I thought it was a really good movie, but
Mhm.
I think they got the message from that like, oh, this means we should put more kind of things that could be perceived as leftist political messages in
Mhm.
our movies. And I'm like, and I think that's the wrong takeaway. Like Black Panther was successful because it was a good movie, because it told a good story, and because the characters were compelling, not because it had certain messages in it that could appeal to the left.
Mhm. Also, people like black people. People like the drums of Africa. People like the fact that they were in the jungle, but it was super modern. People
Mhm.
like the characters. I mean, even the way the key, like what- T'Challa, the way he walked, he had that swag. People like swag and hip hop and all of that stuff. Like everybody likes that. Like when you go to concerts, it's like a rap concert. It's a bunch of white kids, like people
Mhm.
love black culture, black American culture, and then a little bit of African culture. Nobody likes feminism. Nobody wants to go there and lecture on how you are bad because you are a male and how you are bad if you don't think that the patriarchy is bad. Like nobody wants to hear that. There's a small, minute group of Americans that are like gung ho for Gloria Steinem. Everyone else just wants to listen to some Nas and then some J. Cole. Everyone else is like that. So that's why they made that mistake. People like black American culture. Nobody likes feminism.
I honestly, I think that's a very good description of it. And honestly, it's fun. It's really interesting that you bring that up because T'Challa and Captain Marvel are not, to me, night and day different characters. Like T'Challa is very like he's very charismatic. He's very likable.
Mhm.
Um, even I'm not going to say that he always has a smile on his face but he doesn't. But he's not afraid to flash his pearly whites. When the tone is appropriate. Whereas Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, she's uh, uh, she's rather abrasive. She rarely cracks a smile in the movie. She's not particularly charismatic. She's very the nice way to put it would she's very stoic. She's very quiet. And like there, not to say that is necessarily a bad trait in a character if it's done right, but like she is not that interesting, at least in this movie. Now maybe that was purposeful. Maybe they will change that in future portrayals of her character. But in this movie, like Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, he was the charisma in this movie. Like he was uh, the interesting person to watch on screen, and
Right.
that just was not the case really, at least as far as it was interesting to watch Captain Marvel fight, but as far as anything about her as a character, uh, she is, at least in my opinion, I think the least compelling character in the movie whenever she speaks, which again is sad because like the material is there in her backstory for her to be a really interesting character. She just doesn't. I don't know whether that was Brie Larson herself. I don't know that whether that was directing or whatever it was. It just it didn't come off well for me. But I think you're right. Yeah, like if most people, I don't think like I don't men in particular. Like to me, that is the sign that a man is untrustworthy if he is talking about how great third wave feminism is. There is no surer sign of an untrustworthy man than someone who's talking about how great feminism is, and like, oh, I'm wearing like, I don't know, I'm wearing underwear on my head or like I'm wearing tampons on my head to symbolize my solidarity with menstruating women, or I'm like I'm staying home from work today to show solidarity for the right to for women to be in the workplace, and being a stay-at-home dad, and this
Yeah.
yeah they're very
Like
it's sad.
if I were to run into a man, like when I run into men who are like they say things about women, like or they do something about race, like we definitely need a better representation of black women. I'm like, ooh, get out of my face immediately. So it's almost like disgusting because they have the spine of like a noodle, and
Mhm.
that like I'm not procreating with that.
I think that's the sort of thing where I don't even know if it would meet they would meet the level of friend, but I think this is the case where Jordan Peterson would say, "Hey, like, well, I don't find you offensive, but I definitely don't think your genes should be passed down to the next generation."
Mm-mm, no way. So I agree.
Yeah, and there's another piece of uh, something that I ran into that I think really illustrates um, the dangers of men who advocate their abilities, or just kind of who are spying. In fact, that's probably better suited for an offline discussion because we're running over here. But so thank you all so much for joining our enlightening conversation about kind of sort of not really feminist movies, um, the horrible tragedies, and just how people like black culture much more than feminism. So if you would like to check out more of my or Zynga's opinions, definitely check out libertycadre.com. We both write for the site. Um, we also have a couple of other wonderful contributors who put stuff up from time to time. You can follow us on Twitter at Liberty Cadre. You can follow Zynga on Twitter at, let me see if I can get this right. It's Zynga112. Is that right?
11, 12.
Zynga1112. You can follow yours truly on Twitter at the Liberty AMB. That's short for Liberty Ambassador. You can also check us out on YouTube. My YouTube channel is the Liberty Ambassador. I recently posted 2 hot takes from this past week. One actually talking about Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's response to the shootings in New Zealand and something she had to say about that. I was not particularly kind to her, but feel free to go check that out. And you can check out Nzinga on YouTube at Nzinga J is the name of her YouTube channel. So go on and do that. You'll be happy that you did, I am sure. You can also follow us on Facebook at the Liberty Cadre. And also, well, I think that's really all they need to know about us on Facebook. I don't think they need to know about my personal account. I don't know. I may make a like sort of public figure, account soon with all 10 of my YouTube subscribers. I'm sure they'll be interested in that. But so yeah, if you are interested in hearing more of our opinions, be sure to check all of this stuff out. We hope to do more episodes of this podcast in the future. I very much enjoyed it. I'm sure Nzinga did as well.
I did.
Yes, of course. Follow the lead of the patriarchal figure. I'm sure the liberal feminists would love that.
I'm gonna get crucified later, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. But thank you all so much for joining us, and we will talk to you soon.